Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Happy June 2nd, this wonderful Tuesday. Hope everybody's doing well. Jake's Chronicles back in the building. Hope everybody's in a good place, in a safe space. Let's get to work today. So we're going to talk about this week, dealing with our enemies. Yesterday we gave an introduction to the week, talking about dealing with our enemies. Now we're going to dig deeper into what those enemies are and how we deal with them. So the first one we want to talk about is the invisible enemy. And really want you to think about a few things. So as I was doing my research on the invisible enemy, it was very interesting that in the 1970s, there was a sci-fi film called Doctor Who. Some of you may be familiar with it. And in 1977, there was a series as a part of this sci-fi film called The Invisible Enemy. And ironically enough, this series was about a space crew that were traveling in space, and the crew had caught a malignant virus while in their journey. And they caught it from someone who was trying to overtake the space station, but also trying to overtake the universe. Interesting. Think about that. We'll come back to it. So we talk about the invisible enemy, and there are three kinds of invisible enemies we're going to talk about today, and I'm sure there's many more. But the first one, of course, is disease, virus, specifically the COVID-19. We all now know what's required for us to be responsible in terms of how we address it, but there's still no cure. But it's important that we continue to wash our hands, that we are mindful of the social responsibilities we have to ensure that we are not passing the disease with the virus, to other people, and making sure that we're remaining healthy to our friends and family. So please continue to adhere to social distancing. Don't get too comfortable with the uncomfortable elements that are surrounding us, because that's when it will rear its head. And with fears of another wave coming through in the fall, we have to make sure that we remain socially aware. So I'm expecting you all to do that, to ensure that we are still here to spend time together. The next one we want to talk about, the invisible enemy of anxiety and depression. They say anxiety and depression is the inverse of anger. So as we talk about people dealing with COVID, there's a lot of anger that you can see in the protests and the riots that have recently happened. But there's a lot of anger in the household from all of the social economic issues that are happening due to this pandemic that are out of our control. We think about the women that are actually having to carry the heavy burdens of being the leaders of the household, the men who are no longer working, that are used to being the financial givers of the household. There's so much stress and anger in the household. Domestic violence is at an all-time high. Abuse is at an all-time high. It's very important that we be mindful of this invisible enemy, because it can kill us. For those women that are actually a part of abusive relationships, seek help. Don't feel as though you can't. But more importantly, those families that are actually dealing with stress, look for social outlets where you can give back. I'm going to the church again today to donate food as a part of the food drive. Be a part of those things where you can give back to make you feel good about what you're doing, as well as be active, exercise, spend time meditating. There are social outlets that you can involve yourself in with your family, by yourself. Spend some alone time. Step away from the day-to-day. And last but not least, the last invisible enemy we're going to talk about today is Doctor Who, Mr. Donald Trump himself. I want you to be very mindful of this invisible enemy. As last night he talks about activating troops to come into our cities where the protesting and the riots are starting to take over the city, and that they will also eventually potentially have the ability to arrest people. People, please, don't be blind to this. Don't be blind to the invisible. This is all part of a plan. And we have to make sure that we prepare ourselves. Prime Minister of India Modi had mentioned that in order for us to defeat the invisible, we must have an invincible mentality. In order to remain invincible, we have to have a mentality that we will survive. We cannot let the invisible enemy overcome our destiny. So I want you to be mindful to these invisible enemies, but also identify others. We just touched the surface, but I thought these were three very important enemies that we need to be mindful of to ensure that we reach our destiny, and more importantly, to ensure that we remain invincible. So as we walk into this whole situation, looking at our invisible enemies, stay woke, ladies and gentlemen. They're gonna find you. So we gotta make sure that we don't keep a blind eye to those invisible enemies so that we can remain invincible against the invisible. Have a great day, everybody. Get you some. Hope that you have a wonderful day. Catch you tomorrow. Take care.